Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I didn't stream yesterday, even though I really wanted to, but I've been busy and my voice didn't feel so great after streaming several days in a row before that. So I am back today. I do hope to keep up the cadence, as I will be gone next weekend, but I do still hope to put out quite a lot of content in preparation for that short hiatus, not gone for 2 weeks, like I apologize for sometimes being. Now we do have quite a large continuation of our discussions about the M4 iPad Pro, benchmarks, the controversies around what Apple is doing or not. It's really weird to me because I feel like some of the people who really pretend to have like an unbiased view on anything, like they just hate everything that challenges them, not even to like rethink their opinion, but just start to think of something else, right? I saw that with like PC channels when like the M1 MacBook Air, MacBook Pro came out, right? So many of them just flat out refused, for one, to properly review those devices, and secondly, to consider that actually the value proposition of those devices, yes, from a raw hardware perspective, it might not be absolutely amazing, but the difference is you have like advantages like battery life, thermals, and it just felt so artificial the way some of them tried to downplay it. And then some of them waited like 6 to 9 months until there was like a new generation from Intel and AMD, so they had something better to compare it against, because God forbid they actually compare it to anything from Intel that is still on 14 nanometer, even though that's what people were getting and kept even getting for quite a while. And then 10 nanometer came out and they renamed it to Intel 7 and it was barely any better. But this is why I really like, I know a lot about Intel's chips, AMD chips, like the chips inside the PlayStation, the Xbox, the Nintendo Switch, and I know that stuff because it's genuinely interesting to me, and because I couldn't care less which company puts out interesting stuff. Yes, I personally benefit more if Apple is the one doing it, because I am more bought into the Apple ecosystem, or in the case of gaming stuff, it's usually my PlayStation. However, I will not downplay the achievements of tech that I don't have, tech that I don't plan on buying, just so that I can feel better either about my own purchase or like my intellectual superiority on a certain subject. Now, you can see I have Twitter open, which is a little bit untypical for me. I usually try to keep my Twitter stuff separate from YouTube. I usually tell you guys, look, if you really want to engage with this channel, beyond the channel, there's my Twitter account. It is what it is. Twitter is a shit show, but you kind of have to take what you can get, especially if you want to reach like a more like diverse worldwide audience. Twitter is a little bit more present in the West. My YouTube audience tends to lean a little bit more east, so I kind of try to balance that out as much as I can. Now, this guy, it's not important. I'm not asking anyone to bully him. I'm not asking like any kind of big controversy. He is actually just an example. He is not the only one. If any of you like follow, I don't follow him, but I know about him, like Kepler Al2, who he does like a lot of AMD leaks, for example. He has said similar stuff about Apple Silicon and M4, M3, even before we got like comparisons, even before we actually got the benchmarks that we currently have. Guys, let me just briefly check that my stream is working all right. Yeah, it does. Thank you. If you're, by the way, here, please comment, please like, please share, all the YouTube jazz, as I call it. Of course, if you really enjoy it, please subscribe. And as always, please just let me know if my audio and video is working all right for you, because you guys know here how kind of paranoid I can be about these things, but hopefully it will all be fine. So, why am I choosing Twisted Andy, who's supposedly a developer. I'm not here to question that or to confirm it. And he has been on Twitter like making the rounds, and so have other guys, people who are like very big fans of the Snapdragon X Elite, people who have been downplaying Apple Silicon for literally years, people who don't know anything about Apple Silicon beyond like M1. They, like, a lot of people even believe that like apparently Apple Silicon basically started with M1, which is like, that's when the term sort of started, but Apple has obviously been making their own processors for years and years prior to that. And so people have been trying to take the incredibly high Geekbench 6 results that we have seen and try to downplay it. And I want to actually like outline it before we get into the details here. Is if we go to Apple's website, now some might say, well, Apple obviously likes Geekbench, right? So they told you that the M4 would be 50% faster in CPU performance, which this applies to multi-threading, versus M2, though it kind of can apply to single threading, but you will see what I mean soon. They gave you memory bandwidth results, and they gave you render performance results, because those obviously benefit by the support for hardware accelerated ray tracing. Now some might look at this one result, which Apple has like marked as a 4 basically, and think, oh, Apple is using Geekbench or whatever kind of other artificial benchmark. And if you actually go down to Apple's website and you see what they actually mean, you will see that they say testing was conducted by Apple in March and April 2024, so still pre-release products, pre-release drivers, pre-release applications, using pre-production 13-inch M4 units with a 10-core CPU, which means this is the fully enabled M4, and 16 gigabytes of memory, so it's 1 terabyte of storage and up, as well as production iPad Pro. Oh, actually interesting, not just well, obviously the previous iPad, it was production, not just pre-production, with an 8-core CPU and 16 gigs of RAM. That means it had the M2 chip, but fully enabled. And what is funny here, they didn't test Geekbench or whatever. They tested Affinity Photo 2 version 2.4.0.2301 using the built-in benchmark version 21,000. Performance tests are conducted using specific iPad units and reflect the approximate performance of iPad Pro. Of course, yes, because those are pre-release numbers. Apple has to basically be sure that they are as what you should expect from a release iPad Pro, but results can obviously vary a little bit as drivers change a little. Maybe there are some last minute hardware changes. That doesn't happen often, but it has to be part of a disclaimer, right? Now, if we actually go into Geekbench results, you will actually find that if you compare to the M2, which those are Mac results, iPads, it's not like iPads tend to have lower results, it's that iPads tend to fluctuate a little bit more up and down because obviously they're passively cooled. They have even like a little bit less thermal performance than a MacBook Air, at least until this moment. I'm not sure about the M4 MacBook Pro, iPad Pro with its increased thermal performance numbers. But yeah, when you look at the M2 at 3.5 gigahertz, you see results at up to 2600, right? You sometimes see result at around 2400 or whatever, but that is usually more the realm of the M1, right? So for Macs, you basically will get 2600. For M1, you will get basically 2400. So quite a small change, and one that very much lines up with the M1 and M2 sharing basically the same CPU architecture and just clock using the move from N5, the first generation 5 nanometer node at 3.2 gigahertz, and then jumping on the M2 with N5P, the second generation 5 nanometer node with 3.5 gigahertz. Nobody was denying that there was little to no IPC gains here. IPC stands for instructions per clock or instructions per cycle, the latter being a little bit of a more precise metric because a clock doesn't actually always give you that many more cycles of compute as it sometimes suggests, but it is a root metric that we tend to use because it's still a metric that is pretty easy to calculate, pretty easy to ascertain. With M3, we get a similar IPC gain of like 2-3% at max, and then we clock the chip higher to 4.1 gigahertz, and this is how we get to between 3050 and 3200. I would say these results are actually quite a little bit low, maybe, but yeah, so 3200 on the M3, 2600 on the M2. People who take this result at 2700, this is for the M2 Max and Ultra chips, so this was a specific mode created for basically high performance results for those higher end larger chips with a lot more thermals, stuff like that. And then the M1 at around 2400. I think that all makes relatively a lot of sense, especially if you just do some very basic math with the clocks and then consider it's a little bit, the gains are a little beyond the clock speeds. Now with the M4, those results are actually much higher. M4 Geekbench, I actually, for some reason, I didn't save it, but where are the results here? What are they calling here? So we had results early on at around 3700, right? But those results are, well, pre-release numbers on Apple devices tend to be below release numbers usually, unless Apple has to like downclock a device afterwards, which doesn't really happen. Didn't even happen with the A17 Pro that had some thermal issues. We now have some results as high as 3934. So this result is almost like 8% off from like the highest we see. So obviously you have to be careful with what kind of numbers you use. And again, this is also just single core. Now the multi-core is pretty consistent. It's between 14,500 and 14,900. Not to mistake that with the 14900K. That's the name of a processor, and that processor actually also has varying results. That like a lot of stuff actually gives you like 3100, but it's not too uncommon to find like results in the 3600 range once you go to like results where those devices were like super aggressively cooled. The memory was like the highest clocked available, maybe everything was overclocked to the brim, so that and cooled on liquid nitrogen. We sometimes just don't know where those results might come from, and yeah, they also give like pretty typical results of like 2400 on M1, around 2600 on M2. So what are people taking this for? Well, if we actually do the math, right, and we do the 3700 stuff, or more precisely, we do like the 3800, 3900, you will find that not only is the M4 much higher clocked than the M3 at 4.4 versus 4.1 gigahertz, but you also get a massive increase in IPC of like at least 10% to maybe 13%, which is quite a lot considering that the M3 came out like 6-7 months ago. Now this is where we hit our first controversy, because the question is, and I'll actually like, I think I'll have to open this in the browser given how bad the Twitter app is these days on Mac, unfortunately. So again, I'm taking this guy not to dunk on him, not to completely destroy him or whatever, just that he has summarized a couple of points that I really want to debunk. And before I get into that, cheers. And as always, for everyone who is alive, please like, subscribe, share, comment. And if you want to support me directly, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker right as a live stream, or you can subscribe to my Patreon and support this channel in the long term. So, what is the argument he and many others in like I would say the x86 or maybe anti-Apple fanboy community are saying? He starts with Apple Silicon is the new Intel Skylake. If you know, Intel Skylake was a very forward-looking architecture from Intel, and then Intel got stuck on the same node for a while. So they basically weren't able to improve it. They had like newer architectures that were basically like on the same IPC level as Skylake. So what Intel had to do after introducing Skylake was giving us more cores, giving us higher clocks, and also in the process of all that, increasing power consumption, making the chips bigger and bigger, basically eventually like having to dramatically cut down on their own profits to still sell them at a somewhat acceptable price. And AMD, which actually was far behind even Skylake on their architectures, Bulldozer, and then later the Zen architectures, the Ryzen chips as we know them, Zen 1, Zen 2 wasn't even that great at that point, but because the power consumption on Intel was so getting so absurd, AMD was able to make a little bit of a name for itself, also by offering more cores with their chiplet architecture. So what is Twisted Andy giving us as an argument to prove that Apple Silicon is the new Skylake? Georgie is saying, oh, an amazing time to start a live stream. Wait, is that a compliment or is that like an insult? Because this is a really good time for me. This is when I usually prefer to start live streams. I know that like the day before yesterday I started at midnight, but that was because I didn't have time throughout the day. I apologize. This is much more typical for me, especially since I also have like real work to do. At some point this will be the time where most of my live streams happen. So he decided to compare the recently announced M4 chip to the old good M1. The M1, by the way, came out late 2020, so this isn't even a fully 4-year-old chip. So if you ever read like that it's been like 4 years, then don't believe people. It's not even been full 4 years. George, you're saying it's honestly a perfect time for streaming. Well, man, then we have the time now. This is also the time when I can stream for longer. This is the time where I can respond more. So again, if you want to support this endeavor, you'll know all the YouTube jazz, as I call it, to do that, to encourage me to stream more, to encourage me to engage with you guys more. This happened basically like for me half an hour before I started streaming, so I really try to stay up to date. So yeah, I hope you guys feel that. George saying you will watch my stream at any time, to be honest. Oh, that's awesome. But at midnight, I only had one brain cell working overtime. Same, man. At that point, in the end, like, I don't need glasses really, but I was like reading the most basic text at like 1 a.m. like this. So let's continue while I can still read, because it's 6 p.m. To make the comparison fair, as he calls them, he took average Geekbench single-thread results for 2 generations of iPads. There's a difference in the amount of memory. That doesn't really matter for Geekbench, but it should not affect the comparison. So there is some intellectual honesty there. He put those results in an Excel sheet. I will show you briefly why he did that, because there is another guy on Twitter who's currently getting a lot of respect from me, and I will give him a shout out later on. I just want to see his name so I actually can respond better, but he is putting out great little Excel sheets. This is not that. He calculated the average score. He does have a Google Docs sheet, but he also does have a screenshot here, so I will be working mostly with the screenshot. So he says, for one, he took average Geekbench results. We will deal with that fact later, right? He smartly points out that he doesn't attribute any of the changes to stuff like memory, though of course faster memory does change stuff, but new chips supporting faster memory is just a natural part of technological evolution. You don't really want to discard the fact that like an Intel 12900K supports dramatically faster DDR5 memory versus even like an Intel 9900K, which was obviously still locked to DDR4. So those results don't include the object detection test because it uses the SME extensions, which are not supported by M1. Now this is very important because if we actually go to Geekbench 6.3, now we don't want the file, we want the documentation. I hope Geekbench 6.3. No. They did have a write-up on this, right? They didn't put it yet in the blog. They had it like as a separate write-up. Geekbench 6.3 SME. It has to be. Oh, there it is. Guys, I really want to use my live streams to go into a lot of detail. Part of that is that I'm not an engineer myself, I'm not a developer myself, so I am learning with you guys along. So if I ever say something really wrong and you guys really know better, then please feel free to correct me. Now, please don't feel free to correct me if you're a dumbass like certain people, but yeah. Usually I very much appreciate constructive criticism. So, what is he talking about? Well, the M4 chip. Jody, hitting the direct support button here right away with 5 Jordanian dirham. Thank you so much, man. Guys, you guys know the drill. If you want to support me directly, there are super chats, super stickers. George saying in the very much generous super chat, happy Sunday, Mark. Hope you had a blessed weekend. I had. My mom came over and we celebrated Mother's Day for a little bit, but she had to leave a little early, so this is why I went to the gym and now I am streaming. Your insights on Apple related topics are so unique, it brings some fresh air. Well, thank you, man. I put a lot of work. I am not that good, to be honest, at what I'm doing right now, because I am still getting better. And when I look at my videos from 100 streams ago, I cringe. And I hope that in 100 streams later, I will cringe at this video. But I am getting better and better, the bigger and better the community is. The more comments we have, the more I am challenged, the more details people are contributing to my brain, and the more info I can give you so you can have more info to give back to me. This is why this channel is growing. This is why I am hopefully growing as a content creator. So, what are SMEs, or SME in general? Well, Geekbench 6.3 introduces support for that inside their testing, and they actually, as far as I know, they added a specific test for that. So SMEs are called scalable matrix extensions. Those are part of ARM v9, ARM v9 being the latest and greatest version of the ARM CPU instruction set, and they are heavily favoring AI workflows, and therefore stuff like object detection, which we will get to as part of this, heavily benefit from this, because obviously everything these days is being built around AI, and I just really like the idea that honestly all tech grows. And to anybody who doesn't know, Apple Silicon ML Accelerator CPU. So if you actually follow Apple's documentation, Apple has had ML compute capabilities. Obviously everything can compute ML, but it depends a little bit on the workflow, just how good it is. Obviously Apple has had the neural engine inside their Apple Silicon since the A11 processor. When they introduced Face ID, the first neural engine was actually very much tuned to recognize small changes in your face, with for men, how your beard grows, for women, how you might look a little different with makeup and stuff like that. Granted, it doesn't change your 3D geometry, but it's still something one has to account for a little bit. Of course, the GPU is probably the main star of neural engine or of machine learning computation in general, because it just has so much compute power, but it's much less energy efficient at machine learning compute than a neural engine, or as most of the industry calls it, a neural processing unit, an NPU. However, what a lot of people don't realize is that the CPU can also accelerate AI tasks, and in fact it's not just Apple, but Intel in their latest chips has also been improving AI computations that run directly on the CPU. In fact, Apple's CoreML API that allows you to access the neural engine, the GPU also allows you to access the CPU for AI compute, and then the API intelligently decides which part of the processor is most beneficial for that specific tasks. Now, that does not mean that you will run the CPU at full 4.4 gigahertz to get great AI. You will still mostly use your neural engine, some of your GPU. However, involving the CPU is very smart because the CPU by itself also has a dedicated amount of cache. It has almost full access to the bandwidth of the processor, usually not quite as much as the GPU, but in many ways more bandwidth theoretically than most neural processing units that are built into it. The CPU justice also might be already running, right? So why not optimize a task specifically to be smarter on the CPU by leveraging a new, like, I don't want to call it a new instruction set, but like an improvement to an existing instruction set. Sorry, my chat like briefly. Oh, it still works. Great. I always want to hear from you guys. So whenever I rant, I tend to lose focus on a little bit on the chat, and then I have to refocus for a little bit. So, but yeah, thank you all guys so much for keeping up with me. I'm still new to all of this in a way, because the larger the chats get, the more lively they get, the more I have to rethink the way I do my streams, because previously we had like no people watching sometimes, and yeah, that obviously changes now. So, what I was saying, right, Apple does AI on the neural engine, on the GPU, on the CPU. It's all getting leveraged by the system. In fact, when you look at Geekbench machine learning results, which is a special benchmark they put out not too long ago, you will find that it doesn't actually do a great job of ever fully isolating the neural engine, and larger chips with more CPU cores, bigger GPUs, etc., tend to scale better and just show better results, even if they technically have the same neural engine as like a much smaller chip, like an A series processor. So Apple does leverage machine learning across all parts of their SoC. Now, if you compare that to his statement, right, he is basically saying, well, we don't want to see how Apple leverages tech like SME, which are scalable matrix extensions for tests like object detection inside Geekbench, because... And to be honest, I can make the argument it's like a devil's advocate thing, but I cannot really explain it like fully logically, because I just don't believe it whatsoever. The argument is that because not every CPU supports scalable matrix extensions, this shouldn't be part of the test, because it's basically cheating, because this one object detection result is like disproportionately a lot faster than all the other improvements on M4, and therefore they don't count. However, when you look at Geekbench 6.3, right, so it does include SME, which by the way, when this originally came out, I thought that results for like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, the Snapdragon X Elite, etc. would now all go up. Now, I'm not sure about the X Elite, but apparently the 8 Gen 3 and Gen 2, which were already like ARM v9 processors, do not actually support scalable matrix extensions, and Apple including them is not in any way cheating. It's just Apple further improving on the ML compute capabilities that were already part of their industry-leading ARM CPUs. In fact, Apple has advertised faster machine learning acceleration on their CPUs now for several years. They specifically said that this is now also like they have brand new machine learning accelerators on the CPU on the M4, which applies both to the performance and the efficiency cores. But what's so fascinating here is that this is not new. If you actually look at anything that they ever wrote, their white papers, their deeper analysis into machine learning, their analysis of the neural engine specifically, they have always said that other parts of their SoC will be leveraged for machine learning compute. And Apple countered also to certain public opinions, it's not late to AI. They're late to generative AI in ways, but they've been doing what they have called machine learning literally for years. It kind of came around and bit them in the ass that they used the much better term machine learning rather than AI, because everyone else started using AI much more aggressively, and Apple now has to rebrand a lot of their ML efforts into AI so they can appease shareholders. But that's neither here nor there. That's a little bit of a silly discussion, unfortunately, that always happens in the industry. Like, what do you call something? Is something a headset? Is something spatial computing? Is something machine learning? Is something AI? Is something Apple Silicon, or is it ARM? It's all silly in the end. But let us fully break down, right? So that is part of Geekbench 6.3. Basically, you now have results that are accelerated through the support for SME. There are also smaller changes like reduced horizon detection, run-to-run variability. So basically, an improvement to an already existing benchmark. They disable OpenCL on 12. Caused it to crash, so they got rid of it. It's all fine. For systems, so what did they say? And this has been misquoted out of the ass by people on Twitter, and I've actually been running around like a pastor with the Bible, but with this screenshot and screaming at people like, this is what it actually says. Now, for systems without SME instructions, Geekbench 6.3 benchmark scores are comparable with 6.1 and 6.2. The simple reason for that is because they don't have SME, they will neither get faster nor will they get slower. Now, for systems that do support SME, which is apparently right now only Apple's M4 chip, who knows if the XLE does it? We'll have to look deeper once it actually has 6.3 benchmarks. But systems that do have SME will score higher in 6.3 than earlier Geekbench versions. Now, this is where the confusion comes from and where a lot of the disingenuous nature of the discussion comes from, at least according to me. Because this person, Twisted Andy, and others basically are making the point that because M1, M2, and M3 do not support SME, they cannot be compared to M4, while that includes any kind of benchmarks that do support SME results. So basically, their argument is we have to take object detection out, which is the one test that is now fully leveraging SME, and then we can calculate IPC improvements. Now, this is a garbage claim in my opinion, because if a new piece of technology comes out and it supports newer features, right? Sometimes old features simply don't scale that much anymore. So we come up with newer solutions, better solutions, more efficient solutions, more forward-looking solutions to still improve things, right? In many ways, maybe a hydraulic press will not actually get 100 times more powerful while still keeping the same form factor in the way that a silicon processor will. Now, this is a little bit of a silly comparison, obviously, but you do sometimes have to account that newer things do different tasks. George, you're saying you find it quite funny when people keep mentioning Geekbench and call it Apple Bench. Meanwhile, Intel and Qualcomm both rely on it. Yeah, they have actually both done pretty well on Geekbench in their last few generations. Besides, adding SME is fine because it pushes companies to implement it. Exactly, and this is why I've also been kind of shocked that Apple is the first. I didn't pay that much attention to ARM v9 since its introduction, because I always thought, well, once Apple introduces ARM v9, then it really makes a lot more sense to compare. But now I find out that a lot of the ARM v9 implementation that we already have on chips like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, well, apparently they do not support the full feature set. Now, as far as I know, the M4 also doesn't support the entire feature set of SME that could be available, but I'm not a developer or an engineer in that way, but it definitely gets faster. So the claim that this person is making, because this is basically unfair for all the reasons I outlined in the last 20 minutes, I apologize for going on a little bit of a lengthy rant. we have to exclude those tests, and once we do that, we will find that M4 is 5.9, or let's just say 6% faster than M1 in clock speed aligned work, right? So if both of them run at 3 gigahertz or 3.2, which is where M1 comes up to, then a DM4 would be only 6% faster, while obviously if we include object detection, then we would be at the results that I mentioned that are like 13%. Now we will get exactly to how the math is being done by this person, but then this is followed by another disingenuous comparison. Like he compares it to Zen 3, which Zen 3 didn't have the IPC level of M1. It in many ways had like around, like probably less, well for one, not just the clocks, because obviously x86 is kind of designed to run at higher clock speeds than ARM. So, but its IPC was so low, even in the x86 space. Let's just leave out M1 comparisons, right? That it needed to improve that much to Zen 4, which came up to about 12% IPC improvements as far as I remember. In some tasks, by the way, it was only 8%. In certain tasks, it was like 2 or 3%. So it heavily varies on the test, on the specific workflow, how well it's optimized, how modern it is, how much cache dependent it is. But yeah, Zen 3 to Zen 4 got a 10% IPC improvement over, which would be like 2 years, let's say, about. While M4, which this person claims, like, for one, 4 generations, that's not how it works. Like M1 to M2 is 1 generation, M2 to M3 is 3 generations, and M4 is the 3rd generation. That's not how it works. Also, M4 is basically like a highly improved M3, hence why the M3 skipped the iPad Pro. So technically, it's the 2nd major revision after the M1, while obviously Zen 4 is the next major revision after Zen 3. So that's already neither here nor there. It compares architectures that were far behind what Apple was doing with Apple Silicon. Zen 4, by the way, improved IPC, but also increased power consumption. Zen 4 was on a substantially newer node, obviously 5 nanometer versus 7 nanometer, and its improvements in efficiency are in some ways less impressive than Zen 3's improvements to Zen 2, even though they share the same node. This should tell you something with how far behind AMD was with Zen 1, Zen 2, Zen 3, and only Zen 4 can be truly considered like a current gen architecture from them. When Zen 3 came around, it arguably was like, in terms of IPC, a generation behind everything else in the market. So if you ever wonder why were they able to deliver a better IPC increase, well, that's because for one, the timelines are a little stretched here to make it sound like Apple is 4 generations. The gap from Zen 3 to Zen 4 is about 2 years, which is obviously much smaller than the gap from M1 to M3 to M4. It's all those details that these people love leaving out, and we'll get more to that. All the 45% total performance increase, which by the way a lot of tests now show that it's basically 50, comes mostly from the increased frequencies, which also, if you're a developer, if you're an engineer, you know that increasing frequencies while still being able to get the same IPC results is actually not nearly as easy as this person makes it seem. In fact, Zen 2 was actually kind of notorious to have like a super hard limit for afterwards. It just wouldn't scale. I believe it was like at 4.4 gigahertz or so. So you could cool it with like liquid nitrogen to like 4.8, 5 gigahertz. But after 4.4, 4.7 especially, like it just didn't have anything. In fact, IPC started going down because you just reduced the internal stability of the processor. So if you ever think that just giving you increased frequencies because, oh, Apple has a new node to play with, that is still requires like generational improvements, and also improving like an architecture from one node to the next one is also not as easy as this person makes it seem. In fact, Zen 4 consumes quite a little bit more power at its peak speeds than Zen 3. Now that's obviously okay, but it goes far beyond like it actually fully annuls like all the differences between 7 nanometer and 5 nanometer, because to get any of those higher clock speeds that Zen 4 actually has over Zen 3, now you have to sacrifice all efficiency. This is why the mobility products of that are based on Zen 4 are pretty efficient, sure, but they're still like a full generation behind even like the M2 experience. I don't even want to imagine what they feel like in comparison to M4. So basically he is saying the chip architecture is almost the same. This, by the way, if like this person calls himself like a WordPress and WooCommerce developer and tech enthusiast, like if you're a regular developer, right, or an engineer, and you come to somebody and you say that an architecture that has a wider decode, which I believe the M3 went to 9 byte decode on the CPU. There are rumors that M4 might be a 10 byte decode, but that is honestly so outrageous. It allows so much parallel compute in many ways that some people are doubting it, and maybe Apple was just bringing up advantages over M2 while talking about M4, and it might still be at 9 byte decode, which Intel's chips are at 4 bytes, so just for some comparison. And he calls it M1 plus, which would be M2 plus M3 plus. This is M4, right? This was the joke with Intel's TikTok upgrades, right? That eventually we stopped getting ticks. We only got talks, or vice versa. I forgot which one was supposed to be the bigger one always. And we basically started calling not Intel's chips, what we started calling Intel's nodes, Intel 14 nanometer plus 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 plus. So this comparison isn't even correct. Like the plus was used for the node, not actually the chip. Increasing frequencies is not a bad thing by itself, but it dramatically increases power consumption. We, by the way, have no metrics for M4. This person is making this claim on a completely unsubstantiated level, completely leaving out all the architectural complexities of also M4 having extra efficiency cores. Apple's claim that M4 consumes half as much power as M2 while giving you M2 peak performance, which, by the way, as an upgrade in terms of efficiency, far outpaces the node improvements that you usually would see from N5P to N3E. So already, like, so many half-truths, so many lies, so many obfuscations, and saying, oh, Intel does it all the time, even though, like, yes, M3 consumed more power than M2 because, for one, the devices that we got were mostly, like, for actively cooled MacBook Pros, and then the M3 Max obviously had a lot more cores, but when we actually look at the M3 Pro, you will find that because it had a slightly different mix of cores, it was actually in many ways more efficient than the M2 Pro. It still could consume more power, but usually at like 90% of the power draw, it would be like about as fast or even slightly faster, but then also be much more efficient. So it basically had like some scaling questions where it's like, do you even need to like fully leverage the chip, right? It like, again, every workflow benefits a little differently. Some workflows are so small, they basically don't scale with IPC at all. Instead, they really like clock speeds. Like, if you take like a 20-year-old game, it will probably not scale with your dramatically better IPC, with your higher cache amount. It will just eat up every little bit of frequency that you throw at it. And Intel has benefited from that because apps like CSGO on Windows for a while really like just clock speeds and not IPC improvements, with which Intel wasn't even able to give. Guys, I apologize. I put myself in rage mode today, but it was really needed. We are still not done. The most notorious example here is Skylake Architecture 6th Gen, which was used for at least 4 gens with no significant changes, which, by the way, this doesn't reflect Apple's reality at all, so whatever. Another and much older example is Intel's NetBurst architecture. Yeah, I only know basically that it was a little bit of a bust, not much else. Ultimately, this path ends with hot chips consuming a lot of power. Again, this person said without having any analysis of the M4. And Apple is going this route. The power consumption of CPU cores in M4 is expected to be only 1.5 more than M1. It's a pretty good result. Apple is constantly updating the production notes. I've already outlined which one they're using to keep power consumption within a reasonable range, but this approach has some limits. Now, there are 2 limits technically here. One is Moore's law itself, like how much better are the new nodes, and are the nodes actually like designed for higher clock speeds, or are they just designed to be denser, which obviously can actually trap heat between the transistors, so that can actually cause the architecture to not really like higher clock speeds. But and the other difference is your actual new architecture really optimized for a new node, which sometimes people always forget. Like, Apple puts an enormous amount of work to always have like at least a somewhat decently optimized architecture for a new node. In fact, when you look at like N3B inside DM3, you probably might think that it isn't actually that good at leveraging N3B, and I would kind of agree. This is why M4 followed M3 so quickly, and why it's so much disproportionately more energy efficient to even fit inside a 5.1 millimeter iPad. I think Apple will release another 1 or 2 iterations of Apple Silicon. It's funny how they always leave themselves room, right? They're saying, oh, Apple can release 2 more Apple Silicon versions, right? But then, like, they will, after 3 new Apple Silicon generations, they will say, oh, well, the Note was better improved than I thought it was, and like, oh, backplane power delivery really changed the game. Maybe Apple has another 2 iterations in them, right? It's basically bullshit. It's just, you always push that away, so the responsibility never hits you in the face. It's not actually like in any way like representative of the truth of a situation. Guys, give me a moment. Yeah, sorry. Guys, anybody who's watching, can you let me know if there were any technical issues? I saw some stuttering. Maybe it's just the 30 FPS, and I'm not yet used to seeing myself in 30 FPS, but it just felt a little stuttery to me. Maybe I just had some frame drops in between. Let me know. But this approach has some limits. I think Apple will release another 1 or 2 iterations of Apple Silicon before the problem with power consumption becomes apparent to the average consumer. This is like, no, the power consumption problem to the average consumer didn't even become apparent with Intel, and Intel had far worse. So if Apple increases power consumption a little bit, this will never become a problem to users, because Apple can increase battery a little bit, give the devices a little bit more cooling, and everything will be fine. And this is where we get to a big lie. Now, I won't even fact check that, because I'm not gonna hunt for every single person who ever worked for Apple Silicon. This is a flat out lie, and I said I don't want this person to be bullied, and I absolutely stand by it. But this is why you shouldn't ever follow this person or trust him in any way. When this person uses a sentence like, the team behind Apple M1 was acquired by Qualcomm. For one, there was never a team behind Apple M1. The team behind Apple M1 is largely the same, going in many ways back to like the A7 and the A4 chip, right? The A4 chip being Apple's own in-house chip, the A7 being Apple's first 64-bit chip. Then with like the A11, they introduced their own GPU cores and stuff like that. For what? So Apple Silicon did not start, in contrast to like popular belief with M1, the team was not acquired by Qualcomm. Qualcomm poached a few engineers because a few engineers moved and created Nuvia, which was supposed to be like a server company, and then Qualcomm bought them and integrated their latest architecture, or their best architecture, into what we now know as the Ryan cores, which are the cores powering the Snapdragon X Elite and the upcoming Snapdragon 8 Gen 4. This is, for one, like, he forgets like the interim step, but second, it's not nearly the team, it's a few people. The actual main lead of Apple Silicon is still the same. I believe the main guy under him is still the same guy for basically a decade, and then there's like a half a dozen like somewhat big or known engineers who have also been there for like 7 or 8 years for all we know. Like, this is a complete fabrication. Like, he like leaves out the word the entire team, right? But the way the sentence is constructed is so freaking bad, and I hate it so much. Guys, I apologize if I'm breaking your eardrums with the volume. I really got like riled up by this. So is Apple even capable of M1 architecture? Well, they just did, you dipshit. Last year we had an issue with iPhone 15 Pro throttling. Yes, we had a software process that... No! Oh my god, that's a lie! This person is lying. I even like he says that the problem was fixed by reducing frequencies. That is not true. In the early versions of iOS 17, there was a background process that was like poorly like working with certain applications, like what was it, Instagram mainly that had the issue. It was a social media app. It was either Instagram or Snapchat, right? Like, Apple did not reduce frequencies whatsoever. In fact, I believe the only time they like reduced frequencies was like on the A4, like back in the day, because the iPhone 4 was like really bad at handling thermals. It's like, no, what the this is a lie. This year will probably have the same problem. Okay, yeah, the probably is doing a lot of work here, because the frequency has grown, but the architecture is the same, except for, the architecture is now actually ARM v9, which, like, by the way, a lot of fandroids online were like, oh, Apple should really implement ARM v9, look at Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and Gen 3 in real world, they're actually faster in this specific one app that I chose for no particular reason, right? But now that Apple uses ARM v9, or at least a part of the architecture set, instruction set, suddenly the architecture is the same? No, that's not how it works. By the way, even a 6% IPC improvement is definitely not the architecture is the same. That's just not how it works, you piece of... Maybe we'll see a more aggressive clock boost for short periods of time. Again, no analysis here, no waiting for the actual results, like a minute to pass the Geekbench test. Also, by the way, forgetting that even if we have a clock boost on the iPads, which are designed to be like very boosty machines, what does that mean for devices that actually have active cooling? Is there any problem there? What is the issue if Apple has to give devices like 5% more cooling, the way that Intel and AMD like have forced their laptop partners to increase cooling for now a decade? Like, compare actually like mid-high, like lower, no, higher mid-range laptop, right? So not quite a higher-end gaming laptop or whatever, from today to one from 5 to 6 years ago, and I swear they have like double the cooling inside. Like, they have like vapor chamber heat sinks and stuff like that. They have like usually at least 2 fans, right? In the past, it wasn't more common for a lot of laptops to just have 1 fan, just especially for anything that like had like an SoC. But now you even have like 2 fans, often cooling like 1 chip. It's insane, and it's okay, right? As long as the power consumption is still okay, because you like match the battery expectations, the thermal expectations, the size expectations of a device, right? Then what is there to complain about? We as users just get a more premium result, but the extent of these speculations is so freaking stupid. At the same time, I remain pretty optimistic about the market as a whole. Well, ain't that nice that apparently Apple is the only one you feel pessimistic about? Intel and AMD are preparing some interesting products. I'll briefly show you, by the way. Intel, Arrow Lake, IPC. I swear this dude is probably buying, like, hoping for any kind of recognition from the x86 community. For one, by the way, like the company that he's is butt kissing here, Intel Meteor Lake actually had like IPC regressions in certain ways. So, but let's just ignore Meteor Lake, which was a disaster in many ways, because despite jumping 2 nodes ahead, it was barely any efficient. Okay, I'll briefly calm down. Answering the chats. YouTube, cool and cheesy. If the speculation in certain forums are to be believed, DM4 might have found a way to support AVX 512 useful for PS3 emulation. It might be, but as far as I know, AVX 512 simply isn't part of the Geekbench 6 testing. And as I've said before, by the way, the Geekbench results, at least in terms of multi-threading, are lining up with the Affinity Photo result that Apple shared. So it seems, if you have like a modern application, especially one that might benefit from AI in any way, and Apple is currently like preparing like a massive iOS release that will be full of AI stuff baked across the operating system and different applications, somehow it's bad for them to implement a feature that specifically benefits AI. Whatever. Intel Arrow Lake, IPC, no, forget IPC. Lower clock speed. So basically, what he is calling, and I will use his words, some interesting products this year. Now, Intel currently clocks it up to 6.2 GHz on the 4900KS. Arrow Lake is supposedly only going up to 5.5 GHz. Now, some might say, well, but it's also like it has 20-25% faster IPC. Well, yeah, but you also reduce clock speed by 10%. And some are saying, well, it's also much more energy efficient. Well, yeah, but it's also going from, when we actually compare the 3900K, it goes from Intel 7, the node, to now TSMC's 3 nanometer or Intel's 20A architecture on the Lunar Lake things, which is like, you can basically think of Lunar Lake as like the mobile version of Arrow Lake. It's not 100% correct, because you will see some Arrow Lake chips in mobile as well, but that's how you can basically think about it. So Intel is gaining an IPC boost by sacrificing clock speeds, but even more importantly, Intel is sacrificing hyperthreading. For anyone who doesn't know what hyperthreading is, or simultaneous multi-threading in general, Intel's hyperthreading, which is just the name for them, which they call the hardware innovation, it allows basically for one core to run more than one thread. Now, it should be noted that one thread doesn't equal one task, but if we oversimplify it, you can think of it that way. But instead, one core can run 2 threads. Right now, that sounds pretty promising. Now, contrary to some public belief, hyperthreading does not give you double the multi-threaded performance, but it usually can give you 30 to 40% more performance as long as you have the appropriate cache amount and the task is actually optimized to support more threads. So that's cool. And Intel is giving that up in order to get that massive IPC boost. So they're going actually with Apple's route. They're working with relatively low clock speeds, at least by their standards, which Apple's 4.4 gigahertz, if you actually look at the industry, is relatively low clock speeds for a peak frequency, right? Even when you look at the X Elite from Qualcomm, that this does advertise like 4.2 gigahertz peak clock speeds, and that is on on an older node than M4. So Apple is not doing anything hyper aggressive here. Apple is going by some industry standards, and then Apple is just applying their own work to it, right? Working on their IPC, working on the specific task that their chip is good for, right? So when he says Intel has a new thing, an interesting new thing, that thing is losing hyper-threading and losing 10% of its clock speeds to get any kind of IPC jump, despite jumping essentially 2 nodes in 1 generation. This will be what Intel Arrow Lake will be, and it's very likely that Intel Arrow Lake might not actually get any relevant increases in multi-threading performance because of this. So this is what he's comparing to. Now, if we look at Zen 5, because again, I do have the receipts. I follow x86 rumors as much as I do Apple. Now, Zen 5 IPC was for a long time rumored to be like a 40% increase, right? For one, that ain't the case, but that was never really gonna be the case. And now for a little bit, we were starting to speculate. Oh, might it be between 15 and 20%? Right now, everything points to it being around 10%, and there might actually be some clock speed regressions for that. Maybe a 1 to 2% clock speed regression. Maybe they will manage to, in the end, give you about the same clock speed with that 10%. But then again, also you have to consider when you actually look at Zen 4 parts inside Geekbench. Let's look at the 700X, right? Let's not even look at the X3D part with 3D V-Cache. This is their highest performance. And no, it's not 4.5 gigahertz as this suggests. This is at 5.4 gigahertz, and this is a result that is still behind the A17 Pro chip. And yes, that it's an 8-core chip, and it does obviously have like a decent multi-threaded result, but this multi-threaded result is now basically on the same level as the M4, which does only have 4 performance cores, and the rest of its cores are efficiency cores. So the M4 will probably deliver this multi-threaded performance at, I would assume, half the wattage, maybe less. It could be 1/3, to be quite honest, but I don't want to be that aggressive in the prediction. And yes, this is a 5nm part, so it's not like 3 nodes behind M4 or whatever. So just like the amount of cognitive dissonance from what the guy is saying, I know I've been now ranting for an hour, but I really want to give you all my thoughts here because, also the new Qualcomm platform looks promising. What a bunch of Apple hating nonsense. The new Qualcomm platform, what does that even mean? At 4.2 gigahertz, this thing supposedly gets you to 3,000 points in Geekbench at most. Most tests show it far below that. So basically he is showing all the improvements here from M1 to M4, right? And then by excluding object detection, right, he basically comes up to an IPC increase of 5.88%, which obviously, if you consider that there have been now 3 jumps in between, that's not too much. Now, obviously, people did not like that whatsoever, and people really responded to that kind of thing. Where did I put it? Did I put it in more here? This is basically this is not a full Raphael, by the way, big shout out. I will be using some of his data going forward. He's a great guy doing this kind of analysis on Twitter. It's a company called Inisa. I don't know how to pronounce it. I apologize. And he basically broke down the IPC changes from the generations. And he shows that from M1 to M2, there's basically not much to consider here, right? From the M2 to M3, very similar in that way. But then when we go through with M4 and This is, by the way, actually taking a pretty low score for around 3,700. We have now gotten scores that are almost at 4,000 at 3,930. And he got an IPC uplift of around 11.6%. If we want to take out the SME score, right, that's the object detection score, which again, that's a kind of an AI workflow, that's very disproportional to the rest. Here you can actually see it. It's double the performance, right? But even without it, we still get like a 7% IPC improvement just from M3, not obviously just from M1. So those are quite nice numbers, quite a lot better. But then when we actually look at what obviously Apple haters are saying, wait, can I not fully get like the thread of people like responding? Oh my god, I hate Twitter so much. I'm not logging in to actually... I think I've dissected this basically enough. I think we might... So basically, as I've outlined, basically some people are saying object detection shouldn't be included. Without object detection, the IPC gains are lower. But when we actually go to people who are more in the know, right, and we go to stuff like Hishnash, as I call him, Matthäus Woolard, he is a developer. He comments decently on Twitter on a lot of like architectural questions from people like Vadim Yurif and me, obviously. And And when we first started getting into all of these SME stuff and the question of like machine learning acceleration on the CPU, he has said that it depends on how it's written. By all accounts, any high floating point load is a lot faster on the architecture in general. Obviously, if it's specifically optimized for SME, it gets an even larger boost. The speculative out-of-order nature of these chips means it can make use of wider FP engines. Obviously, out-of-order execution is very, very much crucial if we want to leverage larger and larger chips with more and more transistors and more complex workflows, especially stuff like AI. So Apple doing everything to actually get those kinds of results is kind of important, and downplaying it is kind of stupid. So a lot of knowledgeable people will comment on that. It can make use of a wider FP engine, even if you're not using fancy instruction extensions like SME. So if we actually even go to like, I believe I have put that right here, and we go to the M3 and M4, you will actually see that some of the FP results have dramatically improved even without the SME result, right? Like background blur, horizon detection, object remover stuff, all that jazz has all gotten better, and this has been being completely ignored just so this what was it called, or who was it called? Like Twisted Andy can twist himself into pretzels to pretend that this is the actual fair result. So I just wanted to tell you, this is the kind of controversy you will see. I hope that in the future I will learn to comment on this a lot quicker. But as I said, this came out right before I started streaming. So I was working out, and then I saw this a little bit after it was posted. I commented on it. I was not too nice to this person, but I wasn't insulting. So this is kind of where we are at, where some people will now claim that Apple... Well, for one, we had actually quite a scale of escalation here, where at first people said that the high M4 results on Geekbench are fake completely. Then they tried to say that they don't represent anything real world, but then we showed them that, like, no, they actually line up with what Apple has said about Affinity Photo, an actual, like, real world application. And then people have said, oh, but it's only from clock speeds because this one doesn't count. And we have said, well, but other ARMv9 improvements apparently did count on, like, on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, 8 Gen 3 before, just because they don't have this specifically, and this specifically was added to Geekbench like around a month ago, which I assume was because Apple told like Geekbench, like, hey guys, we noticed you don't have this specific kind of benchmarks. Do you think it's actually like maybe fair to include it because it's a modern like AI accelerating workflow? Here's like our new architecture. Want to maybe run a benchmark on it, right? And some people think that this is a conspiracy theory, right? Because they added like this benchmark a month ago. Well, not the entire benchmark, but one part of it, without realizing that this is how it works. Like when companies give you even like pre-release Blender results, for example, well, that's because they reached out to Blender and got early results from them that hopefully were somewhat optimized for their new GPUs, their new ray tracing capabilities, their new AI upscaling or whatever. When Nvidia reaches out to games and tells them to optimize for like DLSS 3.5 and 3.7, it's not cheating by getting them to implement those workflows. It's actually being a good platform holder and making sure that what you're putting out is actually getting relevant support. Guys, I'm taking a small break here from the M4 discussion. Please let me know. For one, am I still technologically sound, right? Am I not too loud, I hope? Can you hear me well? Can you see me well? Are there any technical issues? And of course, it's now been well over an hour, so I feel free to remind you. As always, if you're enjoying this, please subscribe, like, share, comment. And if you want to support this channel directly, George E. has already done his part, but obviously more is always welcome. But I'm grateful for any bit any of you can give. You can support me directly with a super chat or a super sticker, like right in the live stream, or if you want to support this channel in perpetuity or just for a longer period of time, you can find my Patreon link in the description. I should also note that my Patreon account does support a free membership tier. Now that free membership tier is obviously, well, doesn't give you much. I'm currently not running a Discord or whatever, but I do hope to change that sometime soon. But I do hope that as you guys join Patreon, I will also start become more active there, post some stuff there, and I also want for you to join there even in the free tier, so you can let me know what kind of perks would you be looking for in like a paid tier. I've already said I will follow you on Twitter if you subscribe. I'll give you shout outs if you subscribe to the highest tier of my Patreon, right? So those perks already exist, but if you want to suggest more, I'm always open for it. I'm pretty new to all this stuff. I don't do it full time, so I have to learn a lot, and I'm always willing to learn from you guys. So this for now, to me, finishes this topic. Now I do want to finish it with just something very quick. Where is it? iPad 16.6. No. How do I... The problem is if I search for like iPad 16.6, I don't actually get the results that I want. I only get the results that I want by typing in the... it seems to work better this way, right? So you do get quite a lot of benchmarks here, right? So we now are at 56. So in the range all the way from 3600 to almost 3900, and we have recently gotten the one that is 3973. Again, this has also been something I wanted to criticize, like taking averages from a benchmark that is like, for one, look, they're not even all like clock speeds aligned, right? Here you get like a single core result of 3800 at not even a full 4.4 gigahertz, right? And like, this is what I'm saying. If you are using pre-release numbers, you should eliminate the absolute lowest, absolutely, and you might not need to take the absolute highest, which was like the 3900, but take this one, like 3824. Who says that all the other tests are currently not being impacted by the fact that there are background processes running on brand new iPads that are just getting into people's hands, or just like maybe have gotten some kind of pre-release software update or whatever, right? Here you have like actually the highest frequency on the page, 4412, but it is sub 3600 results. Obviously that is less likely to be true, and you can kind of guess that from also the multi-core result that is completely out of bounds with everything else, which is usually around pretty much this 14700. And supposedly it delivers that results at a higher frequency than this. This is what happens with pre-release results. This is the exact same thing that happened with M3 and A17 Pro and every other Apple chip before that. Apple's chips are pretty notoriously for performing a little better once they're actually fully set up and things like that. Well, that kind of applies to all mobile devices, but in my opinion, specifically when it comes to like, oh, something is like a week away, yeah, let me use the lowest result. That definitely is true. So, and when he says like A17 got like a frequency reduction, that is not true. That was not the fix that Apple implemented. We actually had, like, if there is a frequency reduction anywhere on the A17 Pro for stuff like this, then that is not getting reflected in any relevant benchmark that I have seen and ran myself, because I do have the 15 Pro Max. I didn't experience, by the way, thermal throttling before that patch, and I didn't experience it after, so it wasn't even a universal issue, which it would have been if it was actually like a main processor problem with how fast it's clocked, and maybe the motherboard cannot handle it, the power supply cannot handle it, the thermal system cannot handle it. It was a bug and it was addressed. That happens. So, but this is it for now. I will obviously be commenting a lot more on the issue of M4 results as we keep getting more. And again, I'm not encouraging you guys to like pile on this person. What I am telling you is that if you meet this person online and you see similar results like this from this person, again, I have already shown you that there are far better individuals actually covering this. So again, a big shout out to Rafael or Inisa, who does very, very detailed breakdowns here. And obviously people like Hishnash who do like an actual like understanding based breakdown of something even beyond the numbers. So yeah, this is garbage. This is great, and it has nothing to do with how they treat Apple. They give Apple just some of the respect they deserve, the same way that I give respect to like Intel and AMD when it's deserved, or Qualcomm when it's deserved. The reason why I've been so critical of the Snapdragon X Elite is partially its extremely long like build-up time, and the fact that we just have not gotten it even like 6 months into its marketing. So when this person is trying to say like, well, Intel and AMD have something interesting, and I am optimistic about Qualcomm, like, you know that this person cannot and shouldn't be taken seriously. Now, from something controversial to hopefully something much, much more benign, much more simple. It's not even something very much detail, like nothing too detailed. I will get into something more controversial later on if you guys feel like it. But for now, let me focus on the iPhone 16 Pro. It will supposedly be getting a 20% higher brightness screen. So that will actually continue a lot of the improvements like that we're just rumored to get with the 16 Pro, which for the display alone also includes stuff like supposedly even thinner bezels, definitely a slightly larger screen. So yeah, and now we're getting 20% higher brightness. It should be noted that this does apply to the 1200 to the current 1000 nits typical rated highest brightness. It does not apply to the 2000 nits of peak brightness that Apple advertises for the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. We don't know what the improvement there will be, if it might scale with 1000 does to 1200, maybe it scales from 2000 to 2400, but we simply don't know. We haven't yet gotten those numbers. Apple is supposedly implementing actually like a newer like substrate for the screen, so it would actually make sense that Apple would be able to channel some of the energy efficiency improvements into higher brightness. Also, if the iPhone actually does get some of the improvements that the iPad Pro just got for improved thermals, especially stuff like a graphene thermal pad for the processor and the rumored metal casing for the battery, and maybe a copper Apple logo similar to what the iPad Pro got, we might actually get the thermal capacity inside the device to dissipate the heat that gets created by a brighter screen, even if that screen wasn't more efficient, which this supposedly will actually be more efficient. I believe this would be like Gen M15 from Samsung when it comes to like the actual like underlying OLED tech. So actually something to look forward to. Now we do not get any details about this being like an Ultra Retina XDR screen. Ultra Retina is currently what Apple calls their tandem OLED screens, which is when they put like basically two OLED panels and combine them, which the result together is like higher brightness, higher efficiency. In some ways it can actually make it all a little thinner. I've heard some engineers break it down that way, which was actually fascinating. There is no rumor about the iPhone using tandem OLED. Tandem OLED currently does not have the yields to supply the Pro iPhones. It also adds to cost, which, given that the iPhone already gives you like the same typical peak brightness as the iPad Pro at 1000 nits, but then the iPhone also has its more unique like automatic peak brightness, like when you're outside it can go up to 2000 nits, versus the iPad probably not having anything like that, probably just maxes out at 1000 nits. At least Apple does not advertise it that way. So I would believe that it continues like a single layer OLED tech, but it just uses the latest technology across like, well, it's mostly stuff that Apple develops but then builds upon Samsung's and LG's capabilities, similar to how Apple like leverages TSMC. So I would be looking forward to that. I think that's quite a nice thing, especially with what I mentioned. If the screen is actually more efficient and that brightness comes without a significant increase to power consumption and thermals, and if it's actually even paired with better thermals beyond that, then we might get a big leap in like peak brightness and actual usability from the iPhone and how bright it gets. So this is really, really cool stuff. This is basically a small thing. The last thing I want to do is, it's not, I don't plan on doing it for too long, but basically this is a little bit of a diversion from my typical Apple stuff. But as you guys know, the reason why I do live streams is to be a little bit more open with my content, right? I can be a little bit more varied than like a pre-recorded edited video that has to follow only one topic. During a live stream, obviously you guys can tune in, you can tune out to your heart's desire. You can just watch the parts that interest you, and then the next part is about Xbox. Now this might surprise anyone who is relatively new to the channel, because, well, I have done one Xbox video in the not too distant past, but it was a little bit of a very like more comedic video where I covered Doc Dark, like an Xbot YouTube channel. But basically Xbox is in a lot of trouble right now as a brand. Now there are different parts of Xbox. Obviously Xbox is a console, but Xbox is also also a major games publisher that is part of Microsoft. Xbox itself is what we know as Xbox Studios, but that also sort of includes Bethesda, and that also sort of not includes ABK these days after the acquisition by Microsoft. So, but it all gets like thrown together into one like Microsoft gaming division where like their finances are combined and calculated. So this is why some people attribute the success of ABK to Xbox, even though Xbox objectively never did anything for ABK or with ABK that actually gives them access to ABK money. The ABK money belongs first and foremost to Microsoft, and the fact that Microsoft is nice enough to count that into the Xbox, or to be more precise, the gaming division, like Xbox really thought that this would bring up the Xbox a lot, but it seems like that's not the case. And recently we had quite a few developments that suggest that Microsoft might not be really on board with Xbox anymore, at least as like a console business, and they've done things to move away from a more traditional console attitude, at least. Now obviously they have already changed to day-and-day PC releases years ago, and they have introduced Xbox Game Pass, which lets you access their first-party games day one in a subscription service. But quite recently they also started porting their games not just to PC, which they have done for a while, but also to other consoles, mainly the PS5 and to a lesser degree the Switch, the latter being lesser so because the Switch is just so slow that it apparently cannot even run games like Hi-Fi Rush. And recently we had even more developments that made people lose their trust in Xbox, and I would like to use the latest Ryan McCaffrey video at IGN. Again, it's not because Ryan McCaffrey is great or IGN is great, but Ryan McCaffrey does know a lot about Xbox, and he is actually in many ways an Xbox fanboy, so him being super critical of Xbox means a lot. Let's see how that is. So let's put it to here. Let me just briefly make sure that the sound is on. And as always, let me know if the audio and video quality is alright with you, if the stream is just working nicely. And as always, just let me know in the comments what do you think of the topic, what do you think of my commentary on the topic, and what your own opinion is about that topic.
Let me now unveil Xbox.
Stop me if you've heard this one before. Xbox stepped on a rake again. For the umpteenth time in the past decade, Microsoft has found itself on the wrong end of bad news.
Well, yeah, the problem is though that Microsoft doesn't do the most important things to gain the trust of gamers, and that is consistently put out great games. So they always try to convince with their platform, with their subscription stuff, but it never is quite what you want to actually see from a publisher, and so they ended up buying a lot of stuff to like build out their portfolio. But then some of the first stuff that actually ended up coming up out under Bethesda, like Ghostwire Tokyo, that was PS5 exclusive because PlayStation made the deal before the acquisition. Then Redfall was like a disaster, and then Starfield underwhelmed in many ways, and now they own ABK, Activision Blizzard King, which means they own Call of Duty, but now they were forced by courts to keep Call of Duty for at least the next decade on PlayStation. They themselves are not sure if they're gonna put Call of Duty onto Game Pass because, well, I believe they will, but I also believe that will come with quite a hefty price increase on Game Pass. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty. It's not that everything is outright bad, it's just that some of it is stays completely unexplained until they have to do like a last minute disaster response, and then people get even angrier than they would have been if the communication would have been better from the ground up.
And as usual, it's self-inflicted. Just as teams...
Well, the problem with this argument is like, it's not self-inflicted in the sense like, oh, we misspoke and that created a lot of controversy. The problem is, well, we are kind of mismanaged, and based on that mismanagement, we mismanaged our communication, and that is what people are getting pissed off, right? So the underlying process of actually producing great new games is not great, but then the way we communicate about what happens with our games, what games move to PlayStation, what games come to Game Pass, how do we treat certain studios, which is the main topic here, this is where it creates a lot of issues. If they were much better at communicating, it wouldn't solve everything. It would solve a lot of it, though.
Green was starting to gather some positive momentum. Fallout is the biggest show on TV.
I mean, is it? Like, I guess it was for a hot moment. I've honestly not met a single person in Germany who has talked about it with me, so let me know in the comments if you watched it. I tried, like, the first 2 episodes. I liked it a decent amount, but I'm not a Fallout guy, so I didn't really get much into some of the references. The humor was a little bit too much for me. Didn't feel like it really connected to the world. But I do acknowledge that it at least is good.
Boosting all the Fallout games along with it, the upcoming launch of Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, and that may be the very kind of prestige, single-player, narrative-driven, third-person action-adventure that the brand has long lacked.
Would you give your life for these outsiders?
The next Xbox Showcase was also announced for June 9th, where we might finally see the long-anticipated next entry in the Gears of War series, the next entry in Call of Duty, and more. Xbox brass torched the morale of customers and quite possibly its own developers alike by announcing the closure of 3 studios, Tango Gameworks, Arcane Austin, and Alpha Dog, and the consolidation of a 4th, Roundhouse.
So, 3 studios got closed. We will discuss those individually as we go through the video. One other studio that was mainly like a mobile studio got like absorbed into like the guys that make like Elder Scrolls Online, as far as I know. So basically Microsoft is trying to focus everything around their current studios on return on investment. They would rather make less revenue overall, but at a higher profit margin, than let those studios run in perpetuity and risk those studios even potentially putting out flops like Redfall, putting out somewhat disappointing games apparently financially, like Hi-Fi Rush. But then again, not too long ago, they've actually said that Hi-Fi Rush was like an unqualified success, and God knows you cannot really trust guys like Aaron Greenberg from Xbox, but this is what they said. So to me, no, not studios. And yeah, so we basically have a lot of miscommunication. As he says, a lot of Xbox wounds are self-inflicted, but basically they bought Bethesda, they bought ABK, and now they have to focus on return on investment. Bethesda was 7 billion, ABK was 69 billion. ABK is now a much bigger part inside Microsoft than Xbox ever was, because ABK doesn't just generate a decent amount of revenue, but it's also far more profitable than the Xbox division ever was, which means the higher ups at ABK now want to position themselves as basically like the logical successors to Phil. Maybe not in the actual position of like vice president of gaming or whatever he is called, but by actually having direct influence on Satya Nadella, making sure that they know how Microsoft spends their money and stuff like that. Because like Xbox as a console, as a piece of hardware, loses money. We don't know how profitable Game Pass is, and now we have spent like $100 billion across like ABK, Bethesda, all those smaller studios, and now having to run all those studios now for a couple of years, and now Microsoft wants to basically see green, and green, and not the console, but they actually want to see some hard cash returning to them. It's difficult to manage all those acquisitions. Those are a lot of people there, quite a lot of studios. So one studio being actually absorbed into another is something I expected. 3 studios being closed down completely is a much weirder thing, and we will talk about again why these 3 studios, not even specifically, but like just closing 3 studios that were like all basically Bethesda, and closing them after the $7 billion acquisition just feels like an insult, given that Microsoft has pitched all their mergers, all their acquisitions as being good for the broader gaming industry.
We're quick to point back to recent and now hypocritical seeming quotes from Xbox executives, such as marketing boss Aaron Greenberg saying last year that just axed developer Tango Gameworks' Hi-Fi Rush was, quote, a breakout hit for us and our players in all key measurements and expectations.
So in Tango Gameworks, it was fully closed down. Before that, it delivers Ghostwire Tokyo. By the way, Tango Gameworks was Microsoft's only Japanese studio. So if you think that Microsoft has like any respect to be any like understanding of like how to target a demographic by using talent that they already have in a region and building upon that talent, building upon a title that might have not been a gigantic successful financial success, but was like a very big critical darling. So if they don't know how to cultivate this and basically tell them, well, you made Hi-Fi Rush, you took 4 years, now we give you 3 years, put out Hi-Fi Rush 2, make sure it doesn't cost a penny more than the original, you have to reuse assets, you basically be a little less creative, but continue on that streak, continue on that original idea, and then in 3 years we want to have Hi-Fi Rush coming out in a certain quarter. We're gonna see how it adds either to Game Pass subscriptions, engagement numbers, or full out game sales, and after that we will talk to you about how like profitable you are, whether you should be shut down, whether you should be absorbed, or whether there should be layoffs at your studio, right? Or whether you should be rewarded and get to grow to double the size. It's all possible. But instead of that, after a short period of owning Bethesda and seeing the problems of actually managing all those acquisitions, both legally and purely logistically, they just decided, oh, it's better we just get back quicker to ROI by reducing cost, throw out a studio that didn't make a huge success, even though we called it a breakout hit, and close down Tango Gameworks.
We couldn't be happier with what the team at Tango Gameworks delivered with this surprise release. And in the 2021 Xbox documentary Power On, Sarah Bond said the leadership team asked themselves how to learn from and not repeat the same mistake of acquiring a studio, in this case, original Fable developer Lionhead, only to later shut them down.
Yeah, well done.
And 1 year ago...
Which also, the problem with like shutting down studios is like, well, did you ever believe in the talent? Because like when Sony does like downscaling and lets people go, which I don't obviously support, like I hate layoffs, but sometimes layoffs are legitimately necessary. If your profit margins are razor thin and you run into the danger of losing money, nobody's helped by keeping more people on the payroll and actually endangering the long-term prospect of the business, right? But whenever many companies do layoffs, they usually are at least somewhat careful to know. And believe me, Sony has made mistakes in that regard. EA has made mistakes in that regard. Ubisoft, they've all laid off people that are very talented, have been at the company for a long period of time. But there is at least some consideration inside the company to where they do the layoffs. And some people, for example, have criticized, well, why were there Sony layoffs at Insomniac Games? Didn't Insomniac Games deliver like Spider-Man 2018, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Spider-Man Remastered, Spider-Man 2, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart? Aren't they working on Wolverine? Aren't they working on a multiplayer project? Yes, and across all of that, Insomniac has also grown aggressively in size, and especially during the pandemic period, they probably overhired just a little bit, and Sony basically told them, look guys, you are amazing, you create a lot of output, but your last project, Spider-Man 2, was extremely expensive to the point where some of the long-term investment we have in you, which we absolutely trust in you as a studio, we have to manage that with like 3, 4, 5% layoffs, because for one, you overhired during the pandemic. Second, your project turned out more expensive than we thought it would be, and now we correct for that a little. That sucks, and I feel for all the people who were laid off, but that makes sense. Similar to how there is one studio that Microsoft let go, which I kind of understand why they closed down that studio. But like when you think of like the Days Gone developers, for example, at Sony, it's not like they closed down the studio despite Days Gone. Well, some say it sold well, but not at full price, and it wasn't obviously a critical success. But Sony didn't fully close down the studio. They even like tolerated some internal upheaval there, the fact that like the management didn't leave at best terms, right? But they didn't close it down. And then Nintendo is often even more aggressive because of a more like Japanese attitude towards like keeping employees around. At the time when the Wii U was failing in many ways, Nintendo executive accepted large pay cuts to their monies, basically, to keep as many people on the payroll as possible, right? This is part of culture. Layoffs are not inherently evil, though I would argue if you make $24 billion of pure profit every quarter, you probably shouldn't be too aggressive about those. But which of course neither applies to Sony nor to Nintendo, so you can guess to which company that applies to. Apple. Microsoft, I believe it's at 22 billion. Yeah, I'm just saying, layoffs are not what I'm criticizing here. Studio closures are not what I'm criticizing here. I'm criticizing the inherent mismanagement that led them to believe that those layoffs and closures are better for themselves and for consumers than trying to like long-term leverage those studios in any kind of way, while you are actually in many ways at an all-time low, Microsoft. Like, I'm sorry, but like the perception of like your own internal studios, like for a long time people have like praised Halo, Gears, and Forza as like the holy trinity of Microsoft, and the only, but right, but now Halo is obviously has tanked in many ways. Gears is still missing in action. We might finally see a new title being announced at June's showcase. And Forza, while Forza Horizon is successful, but then Xbox Game Pass definitely cut into its sales potential, but Forza Motorsport actually was underwhelming in many ways. It didn't perform quite to the previous titles' levels of like critical acclaim, and it didn't seem to have sold that well or even like acquired that many Game Pass subscribers. So yeah, take it as it will. This is why I'm criticizing Microsoft, not because they simply let studios go, but because this is a symptom of a far, far bigger sickness.
In the wake of Redfall's disastrous launch, Xbox boss Phil Spencer said, quote, "One thing I won't do is push against the creative aspirations of our teams. When a team like Rare wants to do Sea of Thieves, when a team like Obsidian wants to do Grounded, when Tango Gameworks wants to do Hi-Fi Rush when everyone thought they were probably doing The Evil Within 3, I want to give the teams the creative platform to go and push their ability to push."
So going against old statements, right? They're not actually like respecting the creative efforts of their companies internally. If they're giving them the creative freedom to actually like run haywire and create projects that are unsustainable, that's also up to Microsoft, by the way. You're employing those people. You're supposed to manage their resources in a responsible way. You're not supposed to give them a blank check and just say tell them, oh, prove yourself to me. You're actually supposed to manage them.
Push their aspirations, end quote. At best, those once reassuring quotes ring hollow today. At worst, they're outright lies. We've come a long way from Xbox fans once proudly decreeing, "In Phil we trust," and posting photoshopped Dark Knight-esque "I believe in Phil Spencer" buttons online. Awfully, Bloomberg reports that Microsoft might
I will not spoil it, but to anybody who has watched The Dark Knight, it's actually quite foreboding, right? I'll just say, like, you either live long enough to see... was it? You either live long enough to see yourself... Oh my god, I forgot the quote from The Dark Knight. How could that have ever happened? Oh, no. I actually didn't. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. This is the quote. I didn't need to look it up, guys.
Be done making cuts, so this may very well get worse before it gets better. For developers, that would mean further job losses. And for gamers, that might mean another possible Xbox Game Pass Ultimate price increase.
By the way, guys, we have a decent amount of people watching. Please let me know, do you actually look forward to me covering topics like this that are more gaming related, gaming hardware related? I would also like to cover in the future some Switch 2 rumors that have come out that are actually make me a little bit more optimistic about that platform, because obviously I know that this is an Apple focused channel and this is what it always will be. If I ever want to like open up a politics channel, believe me, I will open up a politics channel instead of talking about politics here. But when it comes to like still tech adjacent stuff, like for example, it's not like I will talk every day about PlayStation the way I do about Apple, but whenever the PS5 Pro gets introduced, I would like to cover it here. Whenever they're like a big like PlayStation State of Play or PlayStation Showcase, I would like to respond to it here, watch it live with you guys, especially since we don't actually get to watch like Apple events live. So please let me know in the comments, let me know right now in the live chat. And if you're just enjoying what you're watching, please subscribe, please like, share, comment, and if you want to support this channel directly, do as George E did, leave a super chat, leave a super sticker, or consider subscribing to my Patreon, which you can find in the description of this channel.
So how did we get here? Why can't Xbox stop tripping over its own 2 feet? And with the Xbox organization growing so massive over the past half decade, and its reach extending not just to consoles, but to any device capable of playing video games, can the soul of Xbox even be saved? I spoke to 2 former longtime Xbox employees separately, and both...
So, this basically brings up the most important thing. There is no clear direction from Xbox, right? Now, Sarah Bond has said that we can look forward to the biggest technological leap coming with their next generation hardware. However, there's a big question in like what will that technical leap will be? Will it actually be like a raw performance jump, like what we get from M1 to M4, or will it be more of like a rethinking of what an Xbox should actually be? And will we change from like a home console to a handheld, for example? We don't know. And obviously people who are right now buying an Xbox Series S are already a little bit concerned if their games will have a home in the future. This is why they've talked about like forwards compatibility. A lot of people just believe, oh, it's way better for me to get a PS5, it's way better for me to get a PC, it's way better for me to wait until Switch 2. And this lack of direction is also clear across like their management of studios. Like if you're somebody who liked Hi-Fi Rush, or just like the idea of Microsoft doing very different projects like Hi-Fi Rush, now you have to ask yourself if Microsoft is now going to become the Call of Duty studio publisher. publisher, in the same way that ABK obviously has other stuff, including big stuff like World of Warcraft, but ultimately in many ways they were the Call of Duty publisher, and they sacrificed many a studio to feed the Call of Duty machine, to feed annual releases. And when Phil Spencer originally acquired ABK, he said that they would now be looking into ABK's portfolio of intellectual properties and look into projects that they could revive, smaller projects, smaller franchises, something that could be managed by smaller studios. But Toys for Bob actually ended up splitting themselves off from ABK and Microsoft, buying out their own independence, and now working together with Microsoft, probably to actually handle any of the IPs that they previously had access to under ABK, because that's where their expertise lies. So Microsoft lost the studio but got some money from it. They closed down 3 studios and kept their IP, but now most believe that nothing will happen with like Evil Within, probably Ghostwire Tokyo, Hi-Fi Rush, Prey, Dishonored are a little bit more of a question, because Arcane Leon is mainly responsible for them. The studio that they closed was Arcane Austin, which was like a spin-off from them, and they made the disastrous Redfall. So if you thought that Redfall would be ported to anything, then rejoice, it definitely won't. And we just don't know that stuff. They said, oh, we will port 4 games to PS5 and Nintendo Switch, but now there are a ton of rumors that everything from Starfield to the upcoming Indiana Jones will come very, very quickly to PS5, and that Hellblade 2, a game that is now like 1.5 weeks away, is supposedly like already in discussion of getting a PS5 port, because they internally don't know if it can succeed through Game Pass and sales on Xbox and PC. And if they were to answer those questions and actually like clear up some of the big issues that people have, well, the problem is if they say, well, all of our games are coming to PS5, well, now you have completely killed the Xbox console. The Xbox console is already being outsold in more recent quarters by the PS5 by a factor of 3 to 4x. The combined sales over a lifetime, the PS5 is now over 2x the sales of the Series S, and we are not even a full 4 years into the generation. So Microsoft fears that if they are really, really straightforward with us customers, that we will just stop supporting them, and they are in some ways correct, but ultimately people will also stop supporting them if people don't see a clear direction. So it's kind of like a lose-lose situation in the end. It's just maybe with one you lose a little bit later, with one you lose a little bit quicker. It's hard to say.
Lamented the current state of the brand. One told me prior to this week's awful studio closure news, quote, I had lengthy conversations with a bunch of Xbox founders, and we all came to the same conclusion. It's no longer Xbox, but Microsoft Gaming. Ouch. The other chatted with me at length after the Bethesda bloodbath and believes Xbox is now too big to quickly or easily get its house in order.
That's true.
There is just too much surface area.
Yeah.
You have effectively 3 huge companies at play, and Microsoft never really finished the integration with Bethesda. And Activision is like 3 times the size.
And it will get progressively more difficult to do so, because the talented executives that they might have bought from those companies, including complete assholes like Bobby Kotick, either had to leave or voluntarily left and took a whole bunch of money and maybe even other talent with them. So Microsoft will now have progressively more issues in managing studios that are shadows of their former self. And the United States actually just passed regulations when it comes to non-compete closures that will allow clauses that will allow people to basically switch to a direct competitor much quicker and much more efficiently than ever before, and Microsoft won't be able to tell them shit about it, or any other company for that matter. So it's actually the worst kind of time ever for companies like that are basically like corporate raiders in many ways. Like, think of that about Microsoft. What have they done with Skype? they basically artificially like pulled it downwards so that teams could rise up a little. But even then, like, Teams is like an office thing. It's not still something people use in regular life. It didn't become like a full-on social media thing. LinkedIn has seen no growth since they put like 20 billion. They could have I don't even know what their revenue stream from this is. Like, the same goes for like GitHub and all that shit. And of course, like, their Nokia acquisitions that went absolutely nowhere because they refused to put the proper resources into Windows Phone, because they refused to make it an open platform the way that that Android was, because they saw themselves as competing with Apple arrogantly, the same way they thought that Zune was not competing with like cheap MP3 players but with iPods. Like, that was so delusional. This is why Windows Phone died. This is why Zune died. This is why the Windows 8 redesign died. This is why Windows on ARM is basically a dead man walking, or already a zombie that is crawling towards you to eat your brain because it got momentarily powered up by the Snapdragon X Elite. Like, Microsoft is a hugely successful company because of mainly three things. Now, it started all with Windows, and because Windows is so huge, and because it basically was essentially free money at some point, as every OEM in the market wanted to make a Windows device, so they sold a bunch of, like, an infinite amount of licenses. And on top of that, they built Office, which now is like a long-running subscription with Office 365. They charge horrendous like sums to offices, but they still pay because there's no like real alternative, because they killed everything else. And of course, on top of the money pile from those two businesses, they built Azure, a very impressive, a very technologically advanced cloud computing platform, and that one makes money hand over fist. It's one of the most successful enterprises ever made. It has profit margins that like Apple's hardware could never compete with, right? It often goes into like the high 70s, the mid 80s in terms of its profit margin, depending a little bit on how you count. So Microsoft is immensely successful, but it doesn't actually mean that Microsoft is great at managing projects that doesn't actually like account for those three things, which is Windows, Office, and Azure. When it comes to hardware, they fail to make Surface a giant success. When it comes like the accessories, they fail to make like their headphones any kind of success. Like when it comes to any kind of spin-off of Windows, even like Windows S and Windows RT, and it all failed, right? And this is the problem, because people believe, oh, Microsoft is so profitable, that means they're great at managing stuff. They're great at managing stuff that has already started rolling, right? Because maybe they had like a couple of like really, really smart people who laid the foundation for Windows, for Office, for the compute platform that is Azure, right? And then they were really, really good at scaling those projects up, right? Reaching new Windows device makers to sell them Windows licenses, reaching every business in the world to make them use Office, scaling up their servers so much that everyone wanted to use Azure and allow them to like ask horrendous money for it, right? But if a business is actually not that successful, like Xbox, well, they can basically indefinitely finance it because they do have those three incredibly successful divisions, but they cannot actually change its trajectory because they don't have anybody on board who is willing to make the really, really like gaming focused decisions, the people who can actually recognize talent among developers, the people who are not just good managers themselves from the very top, but who also know how to hire very good middle managers, so that those middle managers can actually make sure that individual parts of a project run smoothly, are developed simultaneously, then they all come together, compare how it's all going, right? It takes specific talent. This is why Sony started their enterprise into PlayStation gaming by originally acquiring a gaming company, but then also hiring more and more people, laying people off that they thought weren't good enough and stuff like that. I promise you, if Phil Spencer was like any kind of leader at Sony, where profit margins are way smaller, and there's no Daddy Satya who is willing to finance your enormous acquisitions and your, in many ways, money-losing enterprises, he would have gotten the boot a long time ago. There's just a different standard because, well, if you are a friend, if you are somebody close, not like he's a family member, to like the most important guy at Microsoft, and that guy just brought Microsoft to $3 trillion of market cap, then the rest of the world will just say, you know what, Xbox is basically a rounding error for us. Who cares if we lose a little bit of money? It gives us some prestige. It gives us some media exposure. Let us not sacrifice that. But now that they've invested $70 billion into acquisition, $7 billion into Bethesda, like several billion across smaller acquisitions, and now they have to spend tens of billions across a couple of years to actually like pay all the people who are working there. Well, now they're asking themselves, well, can a guy like Phil with his like maybe console derived vision actually lead us? Because we are Microsoft. We're a subscription company. We're a Windows company. We are a software company. Why are we selling like a loss leading console? Why are we keeping our games away from consoles that actually sell like 2, 3, 4, 5 times better than ours? Why are we doing any of this? And Phil probably, after those acquisitions, had like basically no power to counteract those arguments. And in fact, the people coming in from Bethesda, originally people like Pete Hines, people from Activision, which again, like Bobby Kotick is out, but I'm sure that Bobby Kotick told them when they acquired ABK that like, oh, why did you never like ask for us to be like in our subscription service? And he would have told them exactly what he told the court in the PlayStation versus Xbox case about the acquisition of ABK, which he said, oh, I don't really believe in subscription services. If I can sell you like consumers like 50 million copies of Call of Duty at $60 or $70, why would I ever put it into a subscription service unless that subscription service had like magically 250 million people in it? So yeah, it's a complicated discussion, but ultimately with a not very complicated like answer, which is that Xbox is not very good at gaming stuff.
Xbox was. They added, quote, Xbox 360 launched with a few hundred people. Last I heard, Xbox is now almost 30,000 people.
Yep.
And that growth has led to, in the opinion of the Xbox veteran I spoke to, increased oversight and meddling from further up the Microsoft food chain. Quote, the reason this seems so inconsistent with previous Xbox leadership team statements is that these decisions probably aren't being made by Phil. This is all getting dictated by Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella and Microsoft CFO Amy Hood.
And also just the board of directors who really, really want to see like Microsoft be as profitable as they can be, so they can go from $3 trillion to 3.5 or 4. They don't even see the need to sacrifice like Xbox as a brand because, well, now it has a lot of revenue because ABK and Bethesda are part of it, but they definitely are willing to cut off everything that might be losing money or might be even at a very low profit margin.
And it all stems from the Activision acquisition, end quote. The long-tenured ex-Xboxer continued, quote, the situation Xbox was in when they made this call was much different. They couldn't keep consoles in stock, making money hand over fist with Game Pass growth, The Activision acquisitions.
Yeah, the problem is they weren't like making actual money hand over fist. They were growing hand over fist, and Phil was like really selling Satya on the future, where Game Pass would be so big that it wasn't just profitable, but where it would actually start changing the entire gaming industry. It would strengthen their position as the Windows brand by having those games also on Windows. It would basically weaken like the PlayStation competition or whatever. This is why Microsoft said for a while that we see like Google and Amazon far more as competition to Xbox than we do PlayStation or Nintendo. That obviously changed, right? And they couldn't keep consoles in stock. Well, that had a lot to do with like the early issues in the pandemic. It had, when you actually look into the amount of Xbox sold, they actually were in line with Xbox One, which isn't terrible, but then you have to also remember that initial sales are usually fueled by enthusiasts, and enthusiasts just like to buy early. It says nothing about the long-term success of your project.
Seemed like a no-brainer. Now, console sales are down, post-COVID recession, Game Pass slowing.
By the way, there's no recession pretty much anywhere in a relevant way. Like even in Germany, we managed to grow like 0.2%. When people say recession, they mean usually like a downturn in the specific industry that they're in. And gaming has dropped post-COVID because obviously during COVID, people were at home playing their games, consuming a lot more media. And now this has come down. But overall, the economy is actually pretty good right now, especially considering that we have like a conflict in the Middle East. We have like Russia wasting resources on a pointless, inhumane war. Like this idea that we are in like a recession that cannot be contained is actually pretty stupid. And I say that as somebody from Europe, and Europe is hardly the continent of growth right now.
The acquisition was more costly and time-consuming than anyone expected. And
yeah, this is actually where Jim Ryan gets a W, because he obviously dragged them through the courts for one, but he also got like concessions like the guaranteed like staying of COD on PlayStation. Now obviously he didn't get like the revoking of the entire acquisition, nor did he get like promises for non-COD titles from ABK. However, given that Microsoft is now willing to give like traditional Xbox studios like Rare games to PlayStation, you cannot tell me that they won't give them ABK games. That just would be stupid.
Focus on fighting the FTC probably cost them time they would have spent thinking through the people and studio implications. I
by the way, good leadership would have done both.
100% believe this is a board-level decision.
I agree.
Xbox was a huge profit center, so Satya approved a huge merger.
Yeah, by the way, this is actually a slightly like misleading comment the way it's worded. I assume what they meant by profit center is they mean it's a business that they really hoped would start turning out actually like crazy profits, because they had plans at this point for Game Pass to be at like 50, 60, 80 million subscribers, and instead it's like languishing below 30 or whatever. And obviously, given that profit margins are very dependent on your overall revenue stream in this case, they kind of like killed the potential for it to actually be a relevant profit center.
Now games are slowing and Microsoft's stock is skyrocketing, and there is no way Satya is
they're
going
an
to let
AI
Xbox
company
drag
now.
it down. This is all my opinion, of course, but I'm fairly certain these are not decisions being made only by Xbox leadership, end quote. That's not to absolve Spencer for his role in all of this, unlike the tone-deaf, won't someone think of all the multimillionaire executives response of former
Mike
Xbox
Ibarra is
hire-up
a
Mike
joke.
Ibarra. Spencer is, after all, the person in charge of the entire organization. The buck stops with him. The Bethesda and Activision Blizzard acquisitions happened on his watch. As such, he is no more shielded from criticism for being, by most accounts, including my own for the record, a very nice guy, than the star professional athlete is for underperforming on the field or court, despite regularly signing autographs for kids before games. But no matter who's to blame for the weight of Activision Blizzard seemingly tipping Xbox's scales out of balance, it's now fair to wonder if and how Spencer can save Xbox's soul. Is Xbox...
No, this is a misguided thing. You already answered your question, which is that this is now a board-run like subdivision of a company. Like as much as he wanted, like there are now Bethesda execs inside Microsoft who want to be completely cross-platform. There are ABK guys who couldn't imagine making good money without being fully cross-platform. All those people who are also used to selling like their games at full price, or like keeping sales going over time, right? They don't want to put it in a subscription service that starts at $11, right? And so the trust in Phil might be lost, but fact is that Phil has lost its power. You can trust in him, you cannot trust in him. Fundamentally, just like Santa Claus, he basically doesn't exist. He's a mouthpiece for the Microsoft board of directors, and he will say, just as Sarah Bond, whatever they tell them to for tens of millions of dollars, which is a great deal, by the way. But like when idiots like Mike Ibarra tell you that like, oh, Phil is also suffering from having to lay off people, it's like, yeah, but he's doing that from a very comfortable position in life. Samahin, you're saying you like the analysis of Twisted Andy's garbage post. Thank you so, man. By the way, you are the guy on Twitter with the same like profile picture, right? Just so I know, because you have a different name
brand
here.
That means anything to gamers anymore? Can it stand toe to toe with Sony and Nintendo? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then what defines Xbox? Is it Xbox Game Pass? Is it big exclusive franchises like Halo?
No, and this is my last answer. Basically, Xbox will be a publisher, and that's as simple as that. As they said, as the Xbox guys said, it's now Windows Gaming. It might not be officially renamed to Windows Gaming, or Microsoft Gaming or whatever, but by all intents and purposes, it is what it is. Again, he has some nice words for Phil, whatever. I don't even think it's really Phil's fault right now. I think it's Phil's fault for mismanaging Microsoft for years prior to this. So I just really wanted to cover it. Guys, we still have actually a few people watching. Let me know, is there something in the world of Apple Silicon, gaming, or whatever else that comes to mind that you would like to see me cover? I think I can stay on for another 20 minutes. If you don't have any ideas, I'll probably be wrapping it up soon so that I don't exhaust my voice, so I can still stream tomorrow. But again, if you do have great ideas, I'm always open to hearing that. If you do have any questions about the topics that I've talked about, and again, we have talked about I've talked about even like iPhone 16 features. Obviously, we've talked about the M4 a lot. We went through a lot of Twitter garbage, and I'll probably have to respond quite a lot after the stream is done with like 16 responses, though I assume a lot of it is just people bickering amongst themselves. Yeah, and as always, I also would like for you to tell me when was actually the best time for you to stream, right? Like today I started at what was the equivalent of 6 p.m. Last time I started at 11 p.m. Like you guys have to let me know which one is best, because I tried listening to the YouTube studio data when it shows me when my like clientele, my audience is actually live, and it has never really helped me gain anything. And while I'm still blabbering around and waiting for your responses, I would also like to recommend you guys, if you're enjoying this, please, the YouTube jazz, as I call it, please subscribe, like, share, comment, and of course, if you want to support me directly, you can look in our live chat. George E did the deed today again, supporting us with a super chat. You can also leave a super sticker, and if you want to support this channel directly in the long term, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel, which now also has a free tier. So if you just want to join there and communicate with me there, let me know what you would like to see as next perks for like higher end tiers. I would very much appreciate the constructive criticism there, new ideas, stuff like that. So if I would just actually like to go, has this guy actually posted anything since then? No, so he basically said it, got some engagement out of it, not actually too much. And when it comes to tweet over and replies, when is the last one? Well, 27 minutes ago. Once the chassis above... Yeah, that's like, of course, in a passively cooled device, once your device is saturated with heat, it has to throttle. That's true for any device. That, like, does he think that Intel is excused from that fundamental level of law of physics? It doesn't matter that much in short tests like Geekbench. Thanks, but 2417 is a bit higher than average, though. If we were to take the IPC would change that much, then people actually told them how to read up on IPC. He pretends that this is not the people are saying. Yes, by the way, I've said that in my rant also before. It's actually really hard to ramp up clock speeds without losing some IPC. This is why usually a higher clocking architecture will have a little bit more cache, or will be like maybe even like it will need higher yields, or it will have to wait for a new node or something like that. Cinebench Error 23 uses the Intel Ember library, which was not optimized for ARM. That's true. Cinebench 24 is much better, but it's still not fully great. I'll definitely look forward to seeing some M4 results once we get like M4. Yeah, by the way, Samain, this is what I meant. You're him, right? You're James Atkinson. So just that I know what to call you, Sam Hine, I think I should pronounce your YouTube handle. You didn't understand the chart, yeah. Thank you, by the way, for doing the Lord's work and destroying that dude. We have this is what I tried to comment to. So he doesn't actually respond that much. I think he just leaves that stuff for engagement farming. Like, look at this ratio: 383 followers to 487 following. That's not the sign of like a very like very like great, like, oh, I create a lot of excitement in the community. That isn't like just drama-rama, right? It's very much like, oh, I very much poison the well, and then I hope that people will drink from it. Yeah, so that's it. From this, I don't think I have that much else to comment about. I think the only thing that's sort of left, but I don't think it's features new internal structure. Oh, what's that actually? I didn't know that. But Apple addressed those concerns. So ultra thin M4 iPad Pro features new internal structure. This was 2 hours ago, so this is why I've missed it. This is when I just started streaming. To improve stiffness and heat dissipation. The new iPad Pro is Apple's thinnest product ever, with the 13-inch model measuring at just 5.1 millimeter thick, excluding the camera bump. Yeah, it's kind of a big bump though in comparison. The last time iPad Pro was redesigned was with the 2018 model. There was a big controversy, as people noticed it was relatively easy to bend their iPads. It was also easy to bend like the 6.1 millimeter iPad Air 2. So take it as you will. It wasn't just the 2018 models, with some arriving bent out of the box, a small amount, very, very small amount. For this ultra-thin design, the question of rigidity and durability inevitably has relevance again. But in an interview with Aaron Miney, I don't even know who that is. Is that the guy who is like responsible? Oh, it's Aaron from okay.
Specific you can share that's. What about the sort of durability aspect of it? Obviously, like, the first thing someone's going to think is, I'm a bit scared when they pick up something that thin. Is there anything specific you can share that's been done with the new iPad that makes it potentially more durable? Like any material change, any specific chassis change?
Yeah, one of the interesting things is the main logic board runs right down the center in between the two batteries on the iPad Pro, and that's really helpful from a thermal dissipation standpoint.
Yes, this is by the way what gaming phones do. It's a little harder to do this. It's also less space efficient, which means it's not a great fit for a phone design. But if you put your chip right in the middle, it will usually have a little bit more heat dissipation. And obviously that's doubly true for, well, it's triply true for a big device like iPad Pro, but also a device that is basically like a massive chunk of aluminum instead of a phone where the middle chunk would just go out into a glass cover on the back.
Have a cowling over the main logic board, a metal cover that also, it helps on both thermal spreading, but it also effectively creates a central rib that runs through the whole thing that tremendously improves the stiffness of the product.
Well, now it will break right along that rim.
And that's new on the new
That's
models.
new on these new iPad Pros.
What about the
I love John Turnus. I think he is very straightforward. I think he has a very good attitude about explaining stuff. Supposedly, he is very much backed by some execs to be the next Apple CEO, and I can actually see that something like this very much speaks to that. So yeah, that's actually quite impressive. So Aaron, what would his name be rightfully pronounced? Aaron Maini? I don't know. I don't want to butcher his name, but I obviously already did. So so he addressed those concerns. We just heard them. There's, well, it's not actually true. Like, from what I understand, the chip was in the center of the iPad for a while, with the two batteries left and right. But now there's the new metal cover is what's new, and supposedly there's a graphene pad for the cooling, which they said during the event. But now maybe that graphene pad directly moves into a metal cover. Maybe that one is stainless steel, and it basically, well, stainless steel wouldn't be great for heat dissipation. Well, it's actually interesting. What would the material be made out of? Maybe just more aluminum, but internally. It creates a central rib, so it improves the stiffness of the product, and of course it's part of the improved thermal performance. It's actually an interesting thing. I personally think this device will still be incredibly easy to bend. I just hope it has no big, like, structurally weak elements, like maybe around where the magnet for the Apple Pencil is. But overall, I do believe that it will still be relatively easy to bend, and however, I just hope it's not easier to bend, right? If that makes sense. And of course, if they do enough stuff to also improve cooling with it, I'm more than fine. I would just put it in a Magic Keyboard, in a Pitaka case, in that new Logitech Combo Touch thing. I wouldn't be too worried. If you know how to use it, in my opinion, you'll be fine with it. But it's Aaron, not Arun, whatever I wanted to call him. I actually apologize, Mr. Rooster Boss. That was pretty stupid on my part. I should have guessed more. And Greg Joswiak said that the design comes without compromises. Again, Apple kind of has to say those things, but usually they don't really outright come forward. Instead, they just wait for basically the market to either prove them right or for there to be just not enough issues to still make those claims. But yeah, if they're actually proactive about it, I kind of am inclined to, well, not outright believe them, but at least give them the benefit of the doubt before the actual device comes out. That being said, I will react to once Jerry Everything inevitably destroys an iPad Pro. However, I will be doing this as like a react video where I will actually, as always, bring up relevant context to the Jerry Everything's tests don't actually reflect real world usage of those devices, that some of those tests are basically just destruction porn, like him burning the screen, though maybe if he gets like the nano texture option, maybe he could actually say that that is better in terms of like protection from a flame. Not that that's very relevant, but you guess you could take that. So yeah, I will definitely react to it. If I ever get one, I probably not getting the M4 iPad Pro, but maybe by the time we have like an M5 or more likely an M6 version on 2 nanometer, I would be definitely on board in using it normally and not testing it, because believe me, I'm not everything Apple Pro. I'm not doing drop tests here. I'm telling you how regular people actually use their regular ass Apple devices. I would actually more likely give you tips on how to use it more carefully versus destroying it. This is why, for example, when what was it, Sam Cole, was it AVP, right, when Sam Cole like destroyed his Apple Vision Pro, yeah, basically for shits and giggles, sort of as a drop test. I'm not a huge fan of that. I know it caused even some controversy with other content creators, but yeah, some people know how to get attention. Apparently I do not. But yeah, I'm not very much into destruction porn of that kind. Like, sure, I do like seeing like how an old house gets like destroyed, so that I know something new will be constructed in its place. But especially when I know it's destruction, that's basically not going to get fixed. Then I feel kind of bad. Then I feel a lot about it, how some people felt about Apple's ad, in the sense that it's wasteful, it's silly. So yeah, so we have that, which was like the news. I think we have one more news, but it's not like one piece of news. Do you have to go through 95 Mac for this, or was it at Mac Rumors? Bloomberg. Can I actually access their reports without paying? Because that is obviously a big decision maker in what I will decide. Guys, while I'm thinking about it, as always, everybody who watches this and is not subscribed, has not left a like, share, or has not shared the video or commented on it, please consider doing so. It helps us tremendously, especially while we are live. It helps us attract new people, and of course, if you feel like supporting my content creation directly, you can do like George E did and leave a super chat right in the stream. Big thank you for that again, George. Or leave a super sticker. That's basically the same thing. Or if you feel like supporting me directly in the long term, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel, now also including a new free tier. Accept and continue. No, can I? What is this? Exclusive. What is that? A new report from Bloomberg. Why does it open up the information? Well, Apple is toasted. Wait, is this not a traditional Mark Gurman write-up? Where's the Power On newsletter for this week? It's now Sunday. Power On newsletter. Gurman. Guys, let me know. Do you know how to get into this without paying? It's preview stuff, right? But 12th of May. Yeah, okay, so this is today's. Okay, good. We actually got here. Is it blocked? No, okay. So he talks about Apple's like continuing leadership. He talks about John Turnus. Again, there isn't that much here to break down about all of this. To receive this full version. Okay. So the starters, yes, he says basically that a lot of Apple executives team like will change over time. Like they're all getting up there in age. They will want to retire probably to enjoy their insanely sized bag of money. But then also again, judging by Phil Schiller, who says that he's still like working crazy work hours just to account for like Apple's App Store stuff, maybe those people will keep on working for far longer than we suspect. So he talks about Jeff Williams, who is the CEO. It's likely that if actually John Ternus becomes Apple's CEO, it would come after like an interim CEO period of Jeff Williams. Jeff Williams being 3 years younger than Tim Cook, sharing a lot of the operations like qualifications that Tim has, but being not an engineer or developer himself. So he just outlines all the people here. But again, I think that all companies are capable of growing and changing, and I will evaluate those changes once those actually happen. When it comes to AI, it's actually interesting because John Gianandrea has been like leading that division at Apple for like 6 years, and this is when we'll actually get some of like the fruits of labor here. He reacts to the iPad's announcement. Where was like, does he not cover Siri here? I believe he did. No? Because there was a recent report that I wanted to briefly cover. Yes, this is it. I think this is... Yeah, this is basically as much as I need. Oh, it was a New York Times report. Right. And I think I briefly mentioned it in my last stream, but I just didn't go into a lot of detail. So basically, supposedly a part of new AI. Now, according to what we also hear about, from Bloomberg, is supposedly there will be ChatGPT powered features in iOS 8. Now, that is obviously Apple using external tech from OpenAI. When it comes to their own stuff, there is a write-up from the New York Times that Apple will be improving Siri. I don't know if that means Siri will tap directly into ChatGPT. Now we know that a lot of Apple stuff will supposedly get powered by their on-device machine learning and their smaller scale language models. However, supposedly Siri is at the focus, at the core of Apple's new AI strategy, and it's basically the write-up is as such. Now I do actually subscribe to the New York Times. Apple will... So can I just open it actually? Yep, it should work, right? Am I not subscribed here? I want to add my account right now. Oh, I can see the full website. It's a little long. I think for now I go with the 95 meg article just to save a little bit of time, because I'll try to keep this under 3 hours. Otherwise I'll be way too exhausted. We can close this. And we can go here. Okay, so citing sources familiar with Apple's work, the report explains that the decision to revamp Siri was taken early last year by Apple's most senior executives. Senior Vice President of Software Engineering, Craig Federighi, and Senior Vice President of Machine Learning and AI Strategy, John Gianandrea, are said to have spent several weeks testing OpenAI's ChatGPT, which, if they actually did and really liked it, then it wouldn't surprise me that they had some kind of partnership, even if they try to still build most of their own stuff in-house. I know this would be a very crude analogy, but it's like their Spotlight search is obviously powered by Apple's own stuff, but then they still have their partnership with Google, right? And I assume that Apple at this point would want to leverage their unique position of having a lot of money, having a lot of resources to invest themselves into AI, their deep partnership with Google, and the way that Google even pays them a buckload of money for them to keep Google search their default search engine. And I assume that now they would also be leveraging, well, Google, but you might want to stop paying us because you believe that Google search is already plenty popular. Well, what do you think will happen if OpenAI launches their own search engine and then they pay us to make it default on iOS? Or what do you think will happen if OpenAI OpenAI integrates all of ChatGPT stuff with Bing, and then we make that the default search engine inside iOS. How do you think Google search will do then, bucko? Right, so Apple will play those players against each other to lower their costs, increase their the quality of their actual final product. I'm actually quite excited about that. So they used ChatGPT to understand how Siri basically compares, or how it looks antiquated in comparison. The Siri team purportedly failed to receive attention and resources compared to other groups inside Apple. I think part of that is that they didn't really have a cohesive pitch, because without basing Siri on a modern large language model, Siri didn't really have that much room to improve, because it doesn't have the huge data set that Google has, even for not large language models, but just for their algorithms. So in my opinion, it just made sense that Siri stagnated for a while, but at this point it would be completely inexcusable if it stayed in this state. And the company has struggled to recruit and retain leading AI researchers. This is also partially why they've now been pretty open in some of their work, making some of their AI stuff open source, publishing some of that in white papers. So Apple definitely is more aggressive, and of course Apple's financial position gives them a lot of the opportunity to just say, come to us, maybe our stock won't increase as much as Nvidia's once did, but we do have probably the largest bag in the industry. Apple execs are said to be concerned that AI threatens the iPhone's market share. It has the potential to become a more compelling OS with an ecosystem of AI apps basically on its own, right? Maybe stuff that could work cross-platform, stuff that directly integrates into a Google Gemini or ChatGPT, right? Or maybe it could even power those silly AI gadgets, but if it actually comes with an AI that has proper app support, then those gadgets, they might not become that dangerous to the iPhone itself, but maybe then just Android vendors just put those same AIs into their smartphones, and now Apple's iPhone starts looking antiquated in comparison. Of course, that also undermines Apple's App Store revenue and profit. It seems like Apple will probably expand the App Store to focus a lot on AI. We don't know if that will happen with a section that shows off AI focusing applications, and Apple then licenses some of their own AI capabilities to other developers, or maybe it would be mini applications that are embedded right into a new Siri, similar how certain applications work as iMessage stickers, right? Not quite as standalone applications. Again, it's all speculation on my part, but you can see that Apple needs to find a cohesive direction here. That's partially what I criticized about Xbox. It's that they don't have one. Now, we don't know what Apple's strategy will be for AI, but we just hope that it's a cohesive, modern, and competitive one. Apple fears that iPhone might become a dumb brick compared with other tech. This conclusion triggered a significant reorganization at Apple amid determination to catch up in the race to develop AI tools. The company moved to reallocate employees and resources toward AI, and the change of strategy was a contributing factor in the decision to cancel its electrical vehicle project. I assume Apple was investing a lot into AI capable chips for the project, because they probably hope to make it full self-driving at some point. They probably were also investing into neural nets and algorithms and LLMs when it comes to self-driving capabilities, and I assume that whatever talented people they had there, they just would much rather have them start working on iOS, macOS, whatever makes them actual money, than waste potentially more and more years for an EV that might probably never came out. Apple's upcoming iPhone 16 models will supposedly feature more memory to suppose AI features. Well, the base iPhone 16 will be going from the iPhone 15 6 gigs of RAM to 8, but supposedly the 16 Pro will be sticking with the same 8 gigabytes of memory as the as the A17 Pro, but have higher memory bandwidth or whatever. And then the A17 Pro generation would move up to 12 gigabytes of memory, which I assume that 2025 and maybe even like late 2024 will be the year where Apple goes 12 gigs of memory, where they previously used 8, where like the RAM has gone down in price enough, even though it has recently also gone up just a little bit, and Apple has enough mass order benefits, basically like loss of scaling in that regard. So I fully believe that Apple can keep mostly the same base prices while moving us comprehensively on the iPhone Pro models from 8 gigs of RAM to 12, on the iPad Pro models from 8 gigs of RAM to 12, and the same goes for basically every Mac in existence except for maybe the cheapest Mac Mini. Apple is expected to reveal a series of AI tools at its WWDC keynote in June 10. So an improved version of Siri that is more conversational and capable, with the ability to chat rather than merely respond to individual queries. So you would be able to have follow-ups, you would be able to like ask for details, you would be able to correct previous inquiries that might have been misunderstood. Very standard stuff at this point for AI chatbots, but definitely if some of that is capable of running on AI on device, that would be very, very impressive. The company is working on making Siri better at handling tasks such as setting timers, creating calendar appointments, adding items to reminders, and summarizing text. When you actually look at all the first 4 things, those things already exist, but I assume Apple would be like saying, well, because the semantic understanding of Siri is so much better, and maybe the on-device stuff recognizes you so quickly, maybe we can fix some bugs where some of those inquiries might have been misunderstood. Summarizing text supposedly will work through the web, through messages. I kind of assume it will probably also work with like email and most just like third parties if they integrate Apple's API, especially if it works offline. But again, it's all speculation at this point based on more and more data, but it's still speculation on my part. And Apple plans to market the new version of Siri as a more private alternative to rival AI services, because most requests will be processed on device rather than remotely in data centers. So I think that's a decent write-up. I'll probably look into the full New York Times article on my own at some point, but it has now been an over 2.5 hour stream. I'm quite exhausted. My voice is starting to go as well. We've covered quite a lot of topics. I'll try to maybe early tomorrow or very late today add some timestamps to this so you can actually go through this. As I've said, I will try to stream through Thursday because on Friday I'm going on a weekend trip, but afterwards I will be coming back and will still be able to stream comprehensively for at least another 2 weeks before some big life stuff happens. Guys, we're basically wrapping up. I've talked a lot. I've talked about Apple's processors, how they're getting covered. I've talked about Apple's AI aspirations and how they might get realized in a month or so. I've talked about even stuff like the iPhone display in the next display in the iPhone 16 generation. I've talked about structural rigidity of the iPad Pro, and of course I talked about some stuff about Xbox because I really felt like covering it. I know that might not be what interests most people watching here. I lost quite a lot of viewers while I was covering it, and I didn't really regain them that much, but I still had fun covering it. Please, if you're watching this and you haven't yet done the YouTube justice, I call it, please subscribe, like, share, comment. If you're watching me live, either right now or at any other time, please consider leaving a super chat or a super stickers. It helps out a lot. It motivates me, obviously. It also, I believe, helps with the algorithm even to show direct support. And of course, if you feel like supporting the channel directly in the long term, you can subscribe subscribe to my Patreon. The link is in the description below. There's also now a free tier if you want to join there. So there's quite a lot of stuff how you can support me, but of course just watching the videos help. And if you want to engage with me directly while I'm not live, you can find my Twitter link in the description of this channel as well, where it usually has like the other social media links. For now, I'm wrapping this up. I'll be back tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then definitely on Tuesday afternoon or evening. I'll still look into the YouTube algorithm when my audience actually is live for my live streams. Maybe I'll try doing it a little earlier than today, maybe a little bit later. It depends. It also might depend simply on when we actually get new rumors, because at that point I might stream at 3 a.m. if there's a big rumor and I couldn't sleep and I saw it and I wanted to cover it. But we'll see how that goes. Thank you guys so much. I so appreciate the incredible growth that we've had on the channel. Not obviously just in raw subscriber count. We are now at well over 100,000 subscribers, but also more people watching live, more people commenting live, more people supporting directly live. So this means a lot to me, and I will try to keep gaining your trust, to encourage you to spend your time with me, to do research with me simultaneously, so that we can grow together both as a community but also just as informed individuals with a preference for technology, a preference for Apple technology in particular, but not exclusively to Apple and not in a fanboyish way. So we will sometimes do what I did today, which is destroy people who come in bad faith and try to present us very bad, misleading data. Sometimes I'll be nice and even like, for example, like Linus recently agreed that the outrage about Apple's Crush ad was overblown. So it's not like I'm incapable of ever agreeing with people who dislike Apple whenever they like Apple. So there's a lot of community growth to happen, a lot of technical improvements that I want to do to this channel. Probably not going to be able to do much this week, maybe afterwards, and as always, I am looking forward to constructive criticism, suggestions of what you would like to see me cover next, any kind of direct or indirect support you want to give this channel. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.